Good evening. I really will be brief because I'm anxious, as I'm sure all of you are, to hear what Undersecretary Malpass has to say to us tonight. We all, I'm sure, have known the Undersecretary for a long time through his public writings. He's had a very distinguished career on Wall Street with us. And his writings have always been a model, I think, of clarity and reason. They require a great deal of thought to understand exactly how he came to his conclusions, even if we didn't agree with them. They have really raised the level of discussion of every topic he's ever taken on as one of his own, really since he began to write on matters of economics and finance. He is one of those rare individuals who's had not only a distinguished public but private career, and we are fortunate indeed that at this moment in our nation's history that he has chosen to set aside his private career with us on Wall Street to return to the government at such a critical moment for all of us. And to break tradition in a little bit, I would hope, even though he gets to have the last word as the keynote speaker, he might share his views with us on, is the economic expansion we are currently enjoying sustainable if it's debt financed the way it has been for the last 10 years? With that, Undersecretary Malpass.
Thank you very much, Ken. And thank you for, I want to thank everyone, but I want to thank Ken for mentioning the written word, which has been so important to me, and I was very proud to have that introduction. In general, it's great to be back in New York with so many friends and familiar faces. I'd like to thank the Foreign Policy Association and its members for the invitation to speak at your Centennial Financial Services Dinner. I'd especially like to thank FPA Chair Sackler, who I had the great pleasure of sitting next to tonight, Noah Latif, and the entire FPA team for putting on a wonderful foreign policy evening tonight. Thank you again, Ken, and thank you, Vonnie Quinn, who was here a moment ago, for providing news and in an entertaining way to millions every week. And I also, above all, I want to thank my wife, Adele, who has been my life partner and my inspiration through thick and thin. Thank you for being here tonight, Adele. Throughout its 100-year history, the Foreign Policy Association has been an important part of the public discussion on world affairs. We heard earlier the first 500 years are the toughest. There have been many important events in those 100 years and many pivotal discussions. It was before this group in December 1979 that Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher gave a forward-looking speech on the prospects for overcoming the tumult of the 1970s. PM Thatcher explained that the world stood at a vital crossroads. It was entering the 1980s, facing high inflation, a collapsing dollar, famines in many countries, apartheid still intact, and communist dictatorships across much of Asia and Eastern Europe. The challenge was immense, and fortunately, history shows a dramatic uplift. Through leadership and sweeping policy changes, especially by Lady Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan, the decade of the 1980s ended with the Soviet Union's Iron Curtain broken, Germany unified, the dollar dependable once again, inflation tamed, and median income rising fast. In his candidacy and first year in office, President Trump identified sweeping changes in policy that were necessary to restore our growth and security, to restore a policy of peace through strength. Tonight, I would like to describe administration efforts to make these policy changes a reality. I'll also describe the growing and important international consensus regarding the non-market direction of China's economic policy. Over the last year, regulatory and energy initiatives took hold and tax reform became a reality, adding materially to U.S. growth. Four-quarter growth is already at its fastest pace since 2014 and likely to go higher, if that answers Ken's question. By lowering the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35% and changing to a territorial tax system, The new law allows managers to focus on creating profitable businesses and building their labor pool rather than offshoring jobs. Many unincorporated businesses will benefit from a 20% tax deduction, helping them compete. Small businesses are often the nimblest and best able to hire and train new workers. That's precisely the workers President Trump wants to draw into the labor force. As workers gain skills, their productivity increases rapidly, allowing more growth than assumed in economic models. Prior to the president's election, the consensus outlook was for weak growth through 2017 and 2018, with longer-term forecasts equally bleak. With the new policies, growth forecasts have recovered sharply. Measures of business investment, business confidence, hiring intentions, and profit expectations have jumped. And I expect new business formation, which is a key measure of future growth, to begin to rise from the deep trough of recent years. Looking abroad, growth has begun to accelerate in many other countries as well. This isn't rocket science, though the economics establishment often treats it that way. Faster growth comes from policy improvements, liberal markets, structural reforms, sound money, the rule of law, and a lot of hard work. In Treasury's international policies, we're working to use this period of relative stability and growth to encourage structural reforms around the world. We have an opportunity to look ahead to the challenges and opportunities of the next decade. One of those challenges is the mission creep and giant sprawl that have taken over many international governmental activities. Peter Cohen was blunt, calling government bloated. To find solutions, we're working at Treasury with like-minded countries to focus the missions at the G20, the group of 20 countries, the G7, the OECD, the Financial Stability Board, and the myriad of international financial institutions that have become accustomed to and dependent on their own expansion. We recognize that successful international relationships include multilateral institutions, but the challenge for them is to have clear, focused missions and deliver results effectively and with accountability to participants and donors. We are making a concerted effort to direct our participation within international organizations toward true progress and solutions that increase median incomes around the world. With 2018 leadership summits in Peru, Canada, and Argentina, the Western Hemisphere in this Year of the Americas has an important opportunity for progress and increased growth. We're putting forward an 11-part set of initiatives called America Crece, or America's Grow, to encourage growth and freedom, to address corruption, and build on the region's ideals of democracy, transparency, human rights, and the rule of law. The economic goal is to improve the business environment and allow median incomes to increase in dollar terms across the hemisphere. The anchor for this is the region's need for energy and infrastructure investment. Another major challenge for the region is in conflict-affected areas, such as the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. They are grappling with economic and security challenges that have forced so many of their citizens to leave their homes and risk their lives in search of economic opportunity. Treasury is partnering with Mexico's finance ministry to co-chair a process to deepen coordination with other donors to help support reform efforts in these countries. One of the most important achievements of 2018 in the Americas would be to see political and economic freedom for all citizens of the Western Hemisphere. While citizens in 33 of the 35 countries have chosen democracy, autocrats in Venezuela and Cuba have chosen to rule through repressive dictatorships. In Venezuela, the United States joins with the members of the Lima Group and with the European Union in demanding free and fair elections to reverse that country's slide into dictatorship and poverty. In Cuba, We condemn the leadership transition that is taking place without the voice of its people. Shifting away from the Western Hemisphere, China's policy direction is a topic of concern among world leaders. China has grown to become a significant force in the world economy. Peter Cohen gave his reflections on that growth. And for many years, the United States welcomed its steps toward liberalization, often without clearly seeing the flaws. Chinese growth contributed to global economic growth, and the hope was that China would develop into a fair, reciprocal, and market-oriented partner for trade and investment. Instead, China's market liberalization has stalled and even reversed, with the role of the state increasing. I testified about this reversal in November to the House Financial Services Committee. State-owned enterprises have not faced hard budget constraints, and China's industrial policy has become more and more problematic for foreign firms. The burden of China's substantial overcapacity in steel and aluminum weighs on markets and workers around the world. China takes advantage of the open investment climate provided by the U.S. and other countries, but does not offer or allow a reciprocal investing relationship. While it professes to embrace globalization and openness, in practice, its trade regime is mercantilist and restrictive. As its portion of world GDP increases, China's direction away from markets is a key risk in the long-term global growth outlook and to the stability of the global economy. On the political front, President Xi has accumulated unrivaled control over decision-making and a degree of personal authority not seen since the Mao era. China's state media conveyed the news last weekend that China's Communist Party had proposed eliminating or waiving the two-term limit on China's presidency. The Washington Post's headline on February 27th read, "China's Xi steps up as the leader of the unfree world." On the foreign policy front, China has worked with the United Nations Security Council to pass multiple UN Security Council resolutions, including 5 in 2017. At the same time, China must do more to implement and enforce these resolutions, as their efforts to date have been uneven. This despite repeated North Korean nuclear tests and missiles overflying Japan. In terms of international finance, China's investments in Africa and Latin America have too often enabled poor governance in Latin America. Non-market Chinese investment abroad undercuts the incentives of recipient governments to improve their business environments, their governance structures, and the macroeconomic policies. Financing deals too often consist of long-term contracts for commodity exports at prices favorable for China, not the exporting country. In light of these developments, the world's recognition of China's goals and policies is evolving from skepticism to wariness and increasingly to rejection. This creates an environment in which market-oriented economies around the world are working together to find constructive responses to China's policies, to its plans for state enterprises to dominate world industries, its investment practices that pose security risks, and its export financing practices that pile debt and questionable projects on countries with governments that are too weak to say no. New York Times China reporter Edward Wong captured China's reversal in a January 9 opinion piece that described a Chinese empire reborn. During years of reporting from China, Mr. Wong's view of China shifted from excitement about China's liberalization to the conclusion that, quote, "the emerging imperium is more a result of the Communist Party's exercise of hard power, including economic coercion." And now, many countries are rethinking their relationship with China. During his January trip to China, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a reset in the European Union's relationship with China, including a more coordinated, fair, and reciprocal relationship between the EU and China, and investment screening to avoid Chinese takeovers of strategic sectors in Europe. A lengthy article by Kurt Campbell and Eli Ratner describes the lack of reciprocity in the world's relationship with China and the acquiescence of previous U.S. policymakers to the advantage taken by China. The authors call for a, quote, clear-eyed rethinking of the U.S. approach to China based on, quote, honesty about how many fundamental assumptions have turned out wrong. Today's Washington Post repeats this same theme with a headline today saying, quote, we got China wrong, now what? This honesty about China's policies was a core plank in President Trump's candidacy and his first year in office, an analysis that is embedded in the administration's national security strategy. A key to a successful, secure, and stable global economy will be working with the international community to find constructive responses to China's slide backward from economic liberalization to state-dominated and mercantilist policies. This will be a tough endeavor given the commercial temptations of doing business China's way, but the work is underway. Thank you for hosting me tonight. It's been a true honor to speak in the wake of titans like Presidents Ronald Reagan and Franklin Delano Roosevelt here at the FPA in this 100th year celebration. And also to all of the medalists tonight, I was proud to be part of the group. I'd like to end with a quote from Prime Minister Thatcher's 1979 speech to this group. She concluded as follows, quote, the cynics among you will say that none of this is new. Quite right, it isn't, but there are no new magic formulae. We know what we have to do. Our problem will only yield to sustained effort. That is the challenge of political leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our wonderful keynote speaker, of course, the Honourable David Malpass there, Undersecretary for International Affairs at the US Department of the Treasury. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of a wonderful program. I think you'll all agree it was wonderful. I'd like to thank you all for your support of the Foreign Policy Association, and a particular thanks to the staff of the FPA as well for putting together such a wonderful evening. Briefly, I'd just love to remind you that centenary celebrations continue, and they continue next week, in fact, with the Centennial Lecture. It's going to be a fantastic one. Do please continue to support this wonderful organisation, and see you next time.